Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Backyards with Bolt. I'm back with Vanessa from Chimo, and we're just going to get right into the questions for the day. So the first question is, how does mental health and counseling tie in with the larger conversation around domestic abuse and supporting the women that are going through these kinds of challenges?
Yeah, so I could give you a really clinical, dry answer to this question, but I thought maybe a thought experiment might work a little bit better. And I imagine for anyone watching this, it will help them to relate better as well. So, it always comes up with my clients. We don't get to choose what families we're born into. Some of us are really lucky and we're born into loving, safe families. And then some of us are less lucky and we're not born into those kinds of families. So take a second to imagine that you were born into one of those not so safe, not so loving families. And so you're a young girl, you're growing up in a home where you see your father abusing your mother, and your father is also abusive towards you. He calls you ugly, he calls you fat. And your mom does nothing to stop him. And so you grow up in this kind of environment. And as a teenage girl, you start to date and find that you have a string of bad boyfriends, boyfriends who cheat on you, are mean to you, call you names. But this all seems normal because that's what it was like with your mom and your dad. So you don't really think anything of it, and you just continue to date guys like this. And then in your 20s, you're sexually assaulted by one of your boyfriends. And then you're sexually assaulted again by a stranger at a party. And when you tell your friends or your parents about this, they don't believe you, or they blame you and tell you, oh, you shouldn't have been so drunk, or you shouldn't have worn that dress. And then, imagine a little later in your late 20s, you meet a guy who at first seems really, really great and nothing like any of those bad boyfriends that you've had. But there are kinds of little small red flags that start to come out in his behavior as the relationship progresses. But you ignore them because, again, they are familiar to you, they're normal. That kind of stuff is just, commonplace to you, and you don't really think that you deserve anything better than that. So you decide to marry this man, and pretty soon after you have kids with him. And after the kids are born, he gets even worse. His behavior gets worse. He starts to become angrier and more verbally aggressive towards you and towards your kids. He's not really involved in their lives. He starts, spending a lot of money without telling you. You start accumulating a lot of debt. He's really controlling. He doesn't let you go out with your friends anymore. He asks where you've been when you've gone out for a couple of hours. He accuses you of cheating on him. And he undermines you in front of your kids in your role as a parent. So after all those years and all of this, imagine how you would feel. What would the state of your mental health be?
I mean, I think that you would just be exhausted, from going through all of that.
Yeah.
I actually know someone that went through something very similar, and I think, even the viewers watching might be going through something like it or know someone that is. Yeah,
so this is sadly a pretty typical story from my clients. I'm not saying this is everybody that I work with, but this is the story I hear from the bulk of the women that I work with, some version of this. And so, think about after, decades of abuse from different men and different roles in your life, you would probably start to have a pretty poor opinion of yourself. You'd have really low self-esteem, really low self-confidence. You probably would be depressed or anxious, traumatized. And then on top of all of that, imagine if someone found out about all of this and said, well, why are you still with him? Why haven't you left? What's wrong with you? Why are you letting your kids grow up in this house? It's victim blaming, firstly, to put that on the woman and say that somehow she's to blame for all of this. This is kind of the default mindset of a lot of people in our society, that it's the onus is on the woman to do something about it. For whatever reason, people go to that before they go to, well, why is he abusive? Why can't he stop being abusive?
Yeah.
That's not where we go to first in our minds, and that's a huge problem, and that's something we need to correct. But yeah, say this woman did want to leave, how would she be able to afford to do that? If she's been out of work for 10 years, it's really difficult to get back into the workforce after that long. And say she didn't have the privilege of having post-secondary education, she's not likely to get a super high-paying job. And in the Lower Mainland, housing alone can eat up the bulk of your income, and even if you can find it to begin with. And so how could she afford that? How could she afford a lawyer to pay for a divorce? So it's never that simple. It's never that easy to leave. And I think if I can get any point across in this conversation, it's that don't assume that women can just walk away and it's easy to do so, because it's not. So yeah, abuse and mental health are intrinsically linked. They go hand in hand. And so counseling, obviously you can't undo any of this stuff that someone has gone through. I can't, make her forget all of these traumatic events in her life, but I can give her a safe space to talk about them, and an empathic person who will sit there and witness her story, and listen non-judgmentally. Maybe, the first person in her life who's ever done that for her. And so there's a lot of power in being able to just finally tell your story and have someone listen to you and believe you and validate your feelings and say, yeah, if I had to go through all that, I would be depressed too. I would be anxious too. You're not crazy. Just hearing that can be huge.
Yeah, I can imagine. And you were talking about, telling someone that you believe them, telling the woman that, I believe you, I stand with you. For someone that knows someone, who's going through this kind of a domestic violence or abusive relationship, how can someone support that person? What is something that you can say or do to show your support?
Yeah, that is an excellent question, because I think everyone thinks that they have to have some sort of magic words. They have to say these words perfectly in order to be helpful, and it's just not true. I think the best way to think about it is, what would you want someone to say to you in that situation? And for most people, they would just want someone to say, wow, that's really awful. That really sucks. I'm really sorry that happened to you. Yeah. No one can solve such a huge problem like that. And so don't put that expectation on yourself that you have to solve your friend's problem, because you can't. Just be there, be a friend.
Those are words to live by, for sure. Just being there, being supportive, and not invalidating their experience. So this sort of transitions into our second question, which is, who does Chimo provide counseling services for? And you've talked a bit about this already. So from someone watching this who's never seen a mental health professional, what would it look like for them to come in and visit you? So from the client's perspective.
Mm-hmm. So, it's not like in movies and TV shows where you come in and you lie on a bed and I sit there with a notepad, It doesn't look like that. It's, two equals sitting in chairs facing each other, having a conversation. So my program is a talk therapy based program. And really, I think of myself as like an empathic mirror. So I'm there to kind of just actively listen to my client and reflect back to her the emotions that she's telling me about, and then any insights or new perspectives that I might have. But I'm not there to give her advice. I'm not there to say to her, okay, now you have to leave him, or you have to take that new job, or whatever she might be questioning. I'm there to be a guide and, kind of help her to confirm what she already knows. So most of the times, if a client comes in here and she has a dilemma, she kind of already knows what she wants to do, but she needs somebody else to just back her up. And so that's what I am. I'm just that support that backs her up. I guess, there's also the cliche that a counselor will just sit there and say, and how does that make you feel? And yes, technically I do say that sometimes, but not because it's an important thing to connect to your feelings. I think a lot of times we're going through the motions in life and not checking in with how a situation is making us feel. And when we neglect those feelings, that's when we can kind of start to encounter a lot of mental health problems. We start to get anxious or depressed because we haven't connected with that pain or that sadness or that fear. So I do ask my clients about their feelings a lot. I guess another thing I'd like to clarify is that your counselor is not your friend. I'm a kind person, I'm a supportive person, but I'm not your friend. My job is to challenge you sometimes, and sometimes it might actually feel a little bit confrontational to a client, but it should never feel disrespectful. But there's no point of me just confirming everything that you're telling me and just saying, oh, you're right about everything. Sometimes I have to kind of point out, oh, maybe there's another way to look at that. So that's really kind of what counseling looks like. It's not maybe as scary as some people might think it is. It's really just a conversation. But you should prepare yourself to do work. It is work to delve into the emotional experience of your life. And so it can be actually even like physically exhausting for some of my clients. Some of my clients say they have like a bit of a hangover for a couple of days after they come in for a session, that they're either like really tired or really irritable or something. So it's kind of like we're going into your brain and rewiring different parts, and think about how that would be quite taxing to do that.
Yeah. And thank you for sharing that. I think, like you said, just based on movies and TV shows, not a lot of people actually know what actual counseling in real life necessarily looks like, right?
Yeah.
So, and like you said, your program is more based on talk therapy. I'm sure there's like other types of programs as well, right?
Yeah. So we have a children's counseling program here as well, and that one is more play based and art based. So but people actually use play therapy and art therapy with adults as well. I haven't done that, but with the kids it works really well.
Nice. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of that. I'm sure that our audience, for someone that hasn't gone into counseling before or has no idea what it looks like, I think you've definitely helped paint a clearer picture of what Chimo's program specifically looks like. So thank you for that, and thank you for sharing. That does wrap up this episode of Backyards with Bolt. So come back for our next episode. Vanessa will be back, and we will continue this conversation. Thank you for tuning in. Bye.
Bye.